My fiancée and best friend stole $115,000 and fled to Morocco, so I made sure her parents, brother, and grandma watched her lose everything. Last Thursday was supposed to be another quiet morning, the kind where nothing ever happens. I had a presentation in 20 minutes and was rehearsing talking points in my head as I walked into the building. That's when my phone buzzed, one single notification from Cassidy, my fiancée of 4 years. I remember hesitating before unlocking it, not because I expected anything strange, but because I didn't want to get distracted. What I saw flipped my entire life upside down in a split second. She'd sent me a photo. Not just any photo. This one was taken at Lambert International, judging by the signs above their heads. She stood at a departure gate, suitcase in one hand, the other wrapped around someone's waist. That someone was Tobias, my best friend since trade school. They were both smiling like kids who'd just robbed a candy store and gotten away with it. The caption was short, brutal, and somehow felt longer than the Bible. It read, "Gone with a real man. Tangier, here we come. Used your savings for our villa. Your mom's pension bought his new watch. And guess what? I'm pregnant, and it's not yours." I read that message 3 more times before the words stopped rearranging themselves in my head. That villa she mentioned? It was supposed to be our honeymoon dream house in Asheville. The pension money? That was from my mother, who passed away last winter after a brutal fight with leukemia. The pregnancy? If it was true, then the betrayal cut deeper than anything else I could imagine. I didn't respond. I didn't scream or cry. I put the phone in my pocket and walked into the conference room as though nothing had happened. I gave that presentation without missing a beat, even though every part of me was cracking like a frozen windshield. The whole time I stood there talking about supply chain metrics and fuel optimization, my heart was pounding against my ribs so hard it hurt to breathe. After the meeting, I walked out calmly, got into my truck, and drove straight to the bank. I didn't even turn the music on. Just sat in silence, fists clenched around the steering wheel, watching traffic blur around me like I was the only person not moving. At the bank, I asked to speak to a representative, told them I suspected unauthorized activity on our joint account. The woman at the desk typed a few things into her terminal, then gave me a look I'll never forget, somewhere between sympathy and disbelief. In 3 days, nearly $44,000 had been withdrawn across international transfers and luxury purchase codes. On top of that, another $8,000 had disappeared from my personal savings account, the one I had intentionally kept separate to hold the last of my mother's pension, which I was saving to build her dream garden deck behind our house. Cassidy had held my hand at my mom's funeral. She cried on my shoulder while we spread the ashes along the Missouri River, saying how grateful she was to have known her. I think that part hurt even more than the money. The banker explained the joint account left no room for legal recovery, at least not easily. The personal account, however, might qualify as theft. He printed the statements and wished me luck with a face that said I'd need it. I thanked him, stuffed the paperwork in my bag, and walked out feeling like I'd stepped into a movie where the hero had already lost before the first scene. By the time I got home, I had already changed every password I'd ever made, frozen my credit reports, and flagged suspicious activity with all 3 bureaus. I walked through the front door of the house we'd once dreamed of growing old in and immediately went to the bedroom. I didn't cry. I didn't yell. I just opened her closet and started pulling her stuff down one hanger at a time. Her dresses, her coats, her boots, and yoga gear. I tossed them all into garbage bags like I was emptying a dead stranger's room. I didn't even care if I broke anything. When I was finished, I loaded the bags into the back of the truck and drove to Lena's apartment. Lena was Cassidy's cousin, the one person in her family I could at least stand to be around. I didn't say a word when I dropped the bags off at her door. She opened it looking half asleep and totally confused. I just nodded, turned back around, and drove off without explaining anything. That silence felt better than any dramatic speech I could have made. That night, I blocked Cassidy on everything except WhatsApp. I figured if this whole fantasy of hers started crashing down, I wanted front row seats. I didn't know what I was waiting for. Maybe regret, maybe humiliation, maybe her trying to crawl her way back into my life with some excuse that would make it all worse. I ordered a greasy burger from my favorite place down the block, drank a cheap beer, and sat in silence. Every time I checked my phone, there was still nothing from her. For 3 days, the silence was the only thing keeping me sane. Then, at 2 in the morning on Sunday, the dam finally broke. My phone buzzed so hard it fell off the nightstand. 117 messages. All from Cassidy. She was stuck in Tangier. Tobias had spent almost everything within the first 48 hours. Rolexes, rooftop dinners, club tabs with strange women. Then he vanished. Left her with nothing. No cash. No return ticket. No options. Just a trail of maxed-out credit cards and a broken dream built on stolen money. She begged me to help her. Told me she was scared. Said she made a mistake. That I was the only one she could count on. I didn't reply. I wasn't going to. I didn't sleep that night, not even for a minute. Just laid there listening to the city hum outside while Cassidy's messages piled up like digital debris. One after another, each more desperate than the last, begging, pleading, bargaining with guilt and half-truths like they could somehow erase what she'd done. At one point, she wrote that Tobias had tricked her, that the pregnancy wasn't real, that she only said it because she wanted to hurt me the way she felt hurt. I stared at that line longer than I should have. It wasn't remorse. It was performance. By sunrise, I'd made 3 decisions. First, I was going to see my lawyer. Second, I was filing a police report, not because I thought anything would come of it, but because a paper trail matters. Third, I was going to stop pretending any of this could be reversed. Cassidy and Tobias didn't make a mistake. They made a plan, and they executed it like amateurs who never thought the fallout would reach them. The law office was tucked behind a strip mall near Cherokee Street, far from where Cassidy and I had ever spent time together. The lawyer, Marcus, was in his early 40s, sharp suit, no small talk. He listened carefully while I laid it all out. Every detail, every transfer, every receipt. I showed him the screenshots, bank records, even her airport selfie. His expression didn't change until I brought up the pension fund from my mother. When I told him it had been in my name alone, he finally leaned forward. That, he said, changed everything. The joint account withdrawals were tricky. Legally, Cassidy had access, and that meant proving intent would be harder. But the pension account? That was cut-and-dry theft, especially since she moved the funds without informing me and then immediately left the country. We had a foundation. It wasn't perfect, but it was real. After the paperwork, Marcus asked if there was anyone else who might have information. That's when I remembered Lena. She hadn't said much when I dropped the bags off, but she wasn't blind. Cassidy and her had grown up like sisters. If anyone knew how long this had been brewing, it would be her. I texted Lena that afternoon, asked if she could talk. She didn't hesitate. We met at a coffee shop off Grand where nobody knew us. She looked tired, like sleep had been optional since Cassidy returned. I expected resistance, some protective instinct to kick in, but she was surprisingly direct. She's been spinning a story, Lena said quietly, stirring her tea like the motion gave her something to hold on to. Telling the family you were emotionally manipulative, that you never let her spend money, that you isolated her. I just stared at her, letting those words settle in the air between us like smoke. She said you were obsessed with control, Lena added. That she was escaping. I pulled out my phone and opened the note I'd been building, a timeline of everything, down to timestamps and transaction IDs. I showed her how Cassidy had been living rent-free while I covered utilities, groceries, even the therapy she claimed she couldn't afford. Over $26,000 in direct Venmo transfers over the past 4 years. Lena's eyes went wide. She leaned in, barely whispering when she asked if she could see the airport message again. When I showed it to her, she covered her mouth. That's not escaping, she said after a moment. That's looting someone's life and bragging about it. Before we left, Lena told me something I wasn't ready to hear but made too much sense. Cassidy wasn't in love with Tobias. She was in love with the idea of being envied. She wanted a life that looked glamorous in photos, not one built on shared sacrifices. Tobias gave her an exit shaped like a fantasy, and I was just the vault she cracked on the way out. The next day, a friend from a tech startup I consult with sent me a message. Tobias had worked on a few ad campaigns through a boutique agency they'd hired last fall. I asked if he was still with them. An hour later, I had the agency's name and HR contact. I sent them a professional email, nothing aggressive, just a clear summary of Tobias's role in the theft, attached with screenshots and a polite note that, as someone with ongoing connections to their clients, I felt they should know. They replied the same evening. Thanked me for the information. Said they were reviewing his status internally. I never asked them to fire him. I just lit the fuse and walked away. Cassidy showed up again on Wednesday. This time, she looked worse than before, like the weight of everything was finally pressing down on her. She stood outside my apartment in the rain for over 20 minutes, then started pounding on the door and yelling about how we could fix this. Said she'd pay back what she could. Said she didn't know what she was doing. Said she missed me. I opened the door just wide enough to show her the police report in one hand and the court documents in the other. Her voice cracked mid-sentence. I told her calmly that if she didn't leave, I'd call the police. Again. Then I closed the door and walked away. I didn't look through the peephole. I didn't wait to see if she cried. Whatever emotion she was peddling wasn't mine to hold anymore. That night, I got a text from a number I didn't recognize. It was Tobias. He said he wanted to explain, wanted to make it right, said he had a plan to pay me back. His exact words were, "I'll cover my half." I sat there for a full minute trying to understand the audacity it took to divide the damage he helped cause like it was a shared tab at a bar. He spent my money with a woman who swore to marry me, then had the nerve to act like 50% responsibility was noble. I didn't respond. Instead, I added it to the file. Every message, every call log, every transaction, all of it building towards something they couldn't wriggle out of. I wasn't just pursuing compensation anymore. I was pursuing justice, and if justice was slow, I'd make sure it was unrelenting. By Friday, the court date was locked. Cassidy had officially been served. So had Tobias. Lena texted me that evening. She said Cassidy was unraveling, telling anyone who'd listen that I was out for revenge, that I was ruining her life for a mistake. But even Lena had stopped defending her. She didn't make a mistake, Lena wrote. She made a blueprint. I reread that line several times. Then I typed back one word. Exactly. By the following week, the air around me had changed, thicker somehow, like the weight of everything was no longer just emotional but something I carried physically. It was hard to explain to people why I looked like I hadn't slept, why I kept checking my phone like a man expecting more bad news. I wasn't waiting for closure anymore. I was waiting for confirmation that consequences still existed in this world. Monday morning, I walked into my credit union and closed every joint account Cassidy and I ever touched. I moved all remaining funds to a brand new bank, one she didn't even know existed. I asked them to flag any suspicious login attempts, even mentioned her name, just in case. I changed every password tied to anything we'd once shared, streaming services, delivery apps, even the grocery rewards card we'd used for years. There wasn't a single trace of her left in my digital life, and it still didn't feel like enough. Then came the blow I didn't expect. I opened our shared credit card statement out of habit and saw another $12,000 charged across 3 days. Hotels, restaurants, boutique shops, high-end spas, and private car services. Cassidy had maxed out our final line of credit before I had time to shut it down. The bank confirmed she used her copy of the card during the last leg of her fantasy escape. I stared at the statement until the numbers blurred, then printed it and added it to the stack of evidence on my kitchen table. I created a folder labeled Theft, and now it was almost full. My lawyer called later that evening, and when I told him about the new charges, his voice didn't even flinch. He just said, "We'll add it to the civil claim." He sounded like someone stacking bricks for a wall that would eventually bury them. Friday night, Tobias showed up at my doorstep again. I don't know what he expected. Maybe forgiveness, maybe just a sympathetic ear. He looked like hell, dark circles under his eyes, shirt half untucked, bottle of something cheap sticking out of his jacket pocket. I didn't open the door this time. I watched him through the window as he pounded his fist on the wood and shouted about how I'd ruined his life. Said I was the reason he'd been suspended from work. Said people were treating him like a criminal. I picked up my phone and showed him the emergency number already dialed. He saw it, hesitated, then kicked at the porch railing and walked off. The neighbors must have heard the noise, because 10 minutes later, the police arrived. I gave them a printed copy of the restraining order paperwork and a detailed description of his behavior. They didn't arrest him, but they filed a report and gave him a formal warning. It wasn't enough, but it was something. That same night, Cassidy's mom called me for the second time. This time, her voice was quieter, like even she had finally run out of defenses. She apologized. Said her daughter was out of control. Said they didn't know what else to do. I didn't argue. I just told her the same thing I'd told everyone else. This wasn't a misunderstanding, and it couldn't be resolved through guilt or nostalgia. She offered to meet in person, but I declined. There was nothing left to talk about that wouldn't end with a courtroom. The next morning, I pulled up the guest list from our wedding website. I sent a short, blunt email to everyone who had been invited. I told them the wedding was canceled due to Cassidy's theft and betrayal, gave them just enough detail to understand without inviting gossip. I didn't care about embarrassment. I cared about truth. Then I deactivated every social media account I had, except for one backup I used for work contacts. The last thing I needed was Cassidy spinning some narrative that I couldn't control. On Sunday afternoon, I got another unexpected visit, this time from both of them. Cassidy and Tobias, standing on my lawn like lost tourists, holding a check and wearing expressions that begged for sympathy. The check was for $12,000, and they called it a peace offering, the first installment of many. I didn't open the door. I just took a picture of them holding the check through the glass, then lowered the blinds. My lawyer confirmed later that the photo, plus the payment, was an admission of guilt. He said it would help. I hoped he was right. Then came a moment I hadn't planned for. On Tuesday, Lena showed up again, this time with a flash drive in hand and tears in her eyes. She said she'd found something while helping Cassidy set up a new phone. A video, timestamped 2 months before the elopement. It showed Cassidy sitting on our couch, feet on the coffee table, laughing while Tobias sat off camera. She said, word for word, he's never going to see it coming. He's saving for a deck. A FING deck. We'll take the money and run before summer hits. Then we're free. She laughed so hard she nearly dropped her phone. Tobias's voice chimed in. It's not even stealing if he never notices until we're gone. I didn't speak for a full minute after watching that clip. Lena apologized over and over, said she didn't know what else to do. I thanked her, told her she'd done the right thing. That file became the cornerstone of our case. My lawyer watched it once and said, "This changes everything." Later that week, Cassidy's legal team reached out. They wanted to settle, offered $75,000 total, broken into a lump sum and smaller payments. I said no. I wasn't going to settle for anything less than what had been taken, plus damages. My lawyer adjusted our demand to $120,000. He said the new evidence supported it fully. Then things began unraveling for them in public. I heard from a former classmate who saw Cassidy get into a screaming match at a downtown wine bar, yelling about how I'd ruined her life over a little borrowed money. Her father had to physically drag her out. She was suspended from their country club later that week. Her social circle thinned fast. The people who once envied her life were now blocking her phone calls. Tobias lost his job entirely. A former colleague told me his employer didn't want to be associated with a lawsuit involving financial fraud. He tried applying elsewhere, but his name brought up search results that linked directly to our civil case. I didn't do anything to interfere with that. It just happened naturally. The walls were closing in around them, and I didn't even have to lift a finger. All I had to do was keep showing up and refusing to look away. Every lie they told, every excuse they gave, every bridge they burned, it all looped back to the same truth. They never expected to be held accountable. But the thing about betrayal is that it always costs more than you think. And the bill was only just beginning to arrive. The morning of the court date arrived with a strange stillness, like the calm before a storm that had been forecast for months. I stood in front of my mirror tying the same navy blue tie I'd bought for our engagement dinner 2 years ago. The one Cassidy said made me look dependable. That word echoed in my head while I buttoned my shirt and adjusted my jacket. I didn't feel dependable anymore. I felt sharpened, stripped down to something that couldn't be manipulated again. When I got to the courthouse, I saw Cassidy before she saw me. Her hair was pulled back tightly, her face pale under a layer of minimal makeup, wearing a plain gray dress like she was headed to Sunday school. She stood between her parents, who looked like they'd aged a decade. Her father avoided eye contact entirely, and her mother kept dabbing her eyes with a tissue like she was rehearsing grief. Across the hall, Tobias appeared alone, wearing a suit one size too big, carrying nothing but a manila folder and a nervous twitch. My lawyer, Marcus, arrived right on time. Calm, collected, and carrying a thick binder filled with everything we'd assembled: documents, screenshots, messages, and the video Lena had given us. He leaned close and told me they'd already attempted to settle again that morning, offering $85,000 total. I told him what I'd told him every time before: no deals unless they felt the full weight of it. This wasn't about money anymore. It was about truth. Inside the courtroom, it was smaller than I expected. No jury, no crowd. Just the judge, a court reporter, a bailiff, and the people who'd turned my life inside out. Cassidy's lawyer started with a speech about emotional distress, financial control, and how her actions were a desperate escape from a toxic dynamic. They tried to frame me as obsessive, cold, and possessive. At one point, her lawyer said Cassidy had been forced to run because she feared for her financial autonomy. Then Marcus stood up and quietly connected his laptop to the courtroom monitor. The judge gave a slight nod. He played the airport WhatsApp message first. The one Cassidy had sent me the morning she left, smiling beside Tobias while announcing her pregnancy and bragging about draining my accounts. The silence in that room grew thicker with every word read on screen. The judge's eyebrows lifted halfway through. Then came the video Lena had provided, Cassidy laughing about my mother's pension and mocking me for saving toward a backyard project. Tobias was visible in the background, grinning and nodding like it was the best joke he'd ever heard. Cassidy's expression collapsed as the footage ended. She started shaking her head, stammering about how it had been a joke, something taken wildly out of context. The judge didn't say a word. He just looked at Marcus and asked what else we had. We laid out a trail of transactions, flight records, receipts with Tobias's name, and private messages found on a shared tablet she forgot to log out of. Messages detailing their so-called freedom launch, calculating how much they could steal without raising suspicion. Tobias tried to interrupt, saying he was manipulated, that he didn't know how deep it would go. The judge asked him one simple question: "Did you spend the money?" And Tobias had no choice but to answer yes. Then Cassidy's lawyer did something that caught all of us off guard. He called a witness, Amelia. At first, I couldn't understand what their angle was. Why would they call the one person who gave me evidence strong enough to sink them both? But then I realized Cassidy had no idea Amelia had turned everything over to me. She still believed Amelia was on her side. What happened next was nothing short of collapse. Amelia walked to the front of the courtroom, sat in the witness chair, and when asked to describe her sister's mental state, she said, entitled, calculated, proud of what she did until it fell apart. The room seemed to drop a few degrees in temperature. Amelia then described how Cassidy had openly bragged to her and another cousin about taking me for everything I had, how she planned it with Tobias for months, how she'd rewritten the narrative for family and friends in advance. Cassidy shot up from her seat, shouting that Amelia was lying, that she was jealous, that their family had always treated her like second best. The judge banged his gavel 3 times, warned her to sit or be removed. That was the moment the mask fell completely. Cassidy wasn't the polished victim her legal team had tried to present. She was raw and livid, unfiltered and fully exposed. Her parents looked like they wanted to disappear. After a short recess, the courtroom returned to a very different energy. Her lawyer's confidence had evaporated. They offered a new settlement, $58,000 for the stolen funds, and an additional $25,000 for emotional and legal damages. Marcus countered without flinching, $125,000, no less. They argued. Cassidy's father groaned into his hands while her mother whispered urgently into her attorney's ear. Eventually, they upped it to $100,000 even. I shook my head. I wasn't there for $100,000. I was there for what was taken, and for the damage that could never be measured by a number. We finally agreed on $115,000. Cassidy's parents paid $60,000 that same day. Cassidy was required to pay the rest in monthly installments of $1,500 over the next 3 years. Tobias agreed to pay $45,000, beginning with an immediate $10,000 deposit from the sale of his car and his savings. The remaining amount would be paid in monthly increments under penalty of interest and legal reactivation if he defaulted. The judge asked if I was satisfied. I said yes, not because it felt like victory, but because I was finally done. Outside the courthouse, Amelia waited. She hugged me and apologized again. She told me her parents were devastated, that they didn't understand how Cassidy could have fallen so far. I told her that wasn't her burden to carry. Then I got in my car and drove home in complete silence. That night, the payments started landing. First came the $60,000 wire transfer from Cassidy's parents. Then Tobias's $10,000 appeared the next morning. I created 2 new savings accounts immediately. One was for rebuilding my emergency fund. The other, set aside specifically for the garden deck I had once planned with my mom. I even printed out the blueprints I found buried in an old folder on my laptop. It felt like I was honoring something again, rather than mourning it. I didn't celebrate. I didn't go out or post about any of it. I just made dinner, poured a glass of wine, and sat outside for the first time in weeks. It wasn't peace exactly, but it was something closer to it than I had known since that awful morning. Cassidy might have thought she destroyed me. Tobias might have believed he was clever enough to get away clean. But the truth always catches up eventually. They'd spend years paying back what they thought would never be missed. And every check that arrived would remind them of what they tried to erase. Exactly 4 weeks after the courthouse door shut behind me, I started to feel like a different version of myself, one not built on what had happened, but on what I was becoming. I moved into a smaller house across the city, somewhere clean and quiet, where Cassidy had never picked out furniture and Tobias had never been invited for dinner. It wasn't flashy, but it was mine. No reminders, no tension in the walls, no shared closets filled with lies. Just space. Every week like clockwork, the payments arrived. Cassidy's transfer hit my account without fail each Friday, exactly $1,500, the bank memo always labeled court settlement. Tobias sent his on Mondays, usually later in the day, always less formal, but still consistent. At first, I checked every transaction the moment it posted. Then it became routine. It no longer felt like revenge, it felt like balance. I focused on myself for the first time in years. I picked up an old project I had buried years ago, a furniture restoration side hustle I'd always wanted to turn into something real. I built a few pieces, sold them to a couple of local stores, and even started taking custom orders. It felt good to create something that had nothing to do with loss, only progress. Then, out of nowhere, the quiet cracked. One Thursday evening, I came home to find a plain white envelope slid halfway under my front door. There was no name on the front, just a faint smudge like it had been carried too long. Inside was a photograph. It was Cassidy, standing beside a brand new sports car, smiling, holding keys, parked in front of what looked like a coastal condo. The caption on the back, written in thick black marker, simply said, "Some lessons are never learned." I stared at it for a long time, wondering if she thought this was some kind of message. A flex? A taunt? A warning? I didn't know. I called Marcus the next morning and told him what had happened. He asked if I had security footage, told me to scan the envelope for fingerprints if I really wanted to push it. I declined. I wasn't interested in chasing ghosts. But something about that picture lingered with me. The following week, Cassidy's payment didn't arrive. I waited a day, then 2, then 5. On day 6, Marcus called to confirm she'd defaulted. He'd already sent the official notice of violation. Under the terms of the settlement, one missed payment meant the full remaining amount became due immediately, with interest and court enforcement. She'd signed it. She knew the deal. 2 days later, Tobias missed his as well. Marcus filed the second notice without hesitation. He said it could take a few weeks to begin garnishment procedures, but the court wouldn't play games. I asked if Cassidy had reached out to delay or explain. He said no. That silence spoke louder than anything she'd ever said. I started hearing whispers from mutual friends. Someone saw her at a new luxury gym near Clayton. Someone else said she was living with a guy twice her age, some investor type with connections and bad habits. None of it surprised me. She'd always been good at reinvention. What surprised me was how quickly she returned to old patterns. She wasn't starting over. She was skipping consequences. The following Monday, Tobias tried to leave the country. He was stopped at customs in Boston, flagged for outstanding legal obligations tied to her case. They confiscated his passport, gave him a hearing date, and sent him back home with his tail between his legs. Marcus forwarded me the court memo, and I filed it with a growing folder of documents titled Aftermath. Then came the next twist. Cassidy posted a cryptic photo to a new Instagram account she'd started under a different variation of her name. A blurry black and white image of her crying in the mirror, captioned, "Some stories have more than one villain." A few hours later, she uploaded a long written post accusing me of controlling her, financially isolating her, and manipulating the legal system to destroy her life. No names mentioned, but everyone could fill in the blanks. I didn't respond, but I saved everything. I figured it might be useful later. That same week, Marcus called again. He said Cassidy was attempting to countersue for defamation and emotional damages. I laughed out loud when I heard it. He didn't. He said it wasn't uncommon for people in her position to try and flip the narrative once they realized public sympathy was slipping through their fingers. He told me not to worry. He'd already drafted the response. We'd win. But it meant another court date. Another few months of this garbage. That night, I stood in my workshop surrounded by sanded oak and sawdust, and I let the weight of it hit me. Not the betrayal, not the money, but the sheer absurdity that someone who had taken so much could keep pushing like they were the victim. I poured a drink, sat on the edge of my workbench, and reminded myself that I had already survived the worst of it. Everything from here on was just noise. And then, as if life wanted to throw one final curveball, Amelia called. I hadn't spoken to her since the last court date. Her voice was different now, steady, focused, like someone who had spent the last few months watching a train wreck and decided to step off the tracks. She told me Cassidy had burned every bridge she had left, that her parents had finally cut her off financially. that she'd been kicked out of the condo after fighting with a man who was supposedly paying her rent, that she was living in a short-term motel on the edge of town, working part-time at a boutique where nobody recognized her anymore. Amelia said Cassidy blamed me for all of it. Blamed her. Blamed the world. But never herself. She paused, then added something that stuck with me. She's still waiting for someone to save her, Amelia said. But the difference is, no one's coming this time. 2 days later, I got another envelope. This one had no return address, no markings at all. Inside was a single sheet of paper, written in Cassidy's handwriting, just 3 words. You win. Congratulations. I didn't know what to feel. Relief? Closure? Victory? I folded the paper in half, slid it into the folder with the rest of the documents, and closed the drawer. This chapter wasn't going to end with a dramatic finale or a final confrontation. It ended in silence. And for once, I was completely okay with that.